All right. Hey, I got that YouTube channel up and running. I got some up there for my other class. Thought I'd do a little bit for y'all. This is for the 8-week course, the endocrine system. So hang on. So now when it comes to the endocrine system, it coordinates with the nervous system. The nervous system is helping you to stay in contact with outside, and it reacts to things outside of your body, whereas the endocrine system helps the internal environment. So it helps to maintain homeostasis within, and the two of them, they work together and such. Whereas the nervous system, it functions with an action potential, which is, the sodium, potassium, change of places and all. The endocrine system, it functions through hormones. And these hormones are released by glands, and they travel to their target organ, and that target cell, target organ, target gland has receptors on its cell membranes, which these hormones will fit into in a lock and key type theory. The hormones are released directly into the blood, so they don't travel down a duct or anything. They're released straight into the blood, and then the blood washes all around, and it ends up on them. They are different from exocrine glands. Exocrine glands secrete their materials through a duct outside of the body. And you have to remember, when we're dealing with the oral cavity, the lumen of the stomach, the lumen of the intestines and such, those areas are actually outside of the body and all. So when we look at hormones, we put them into three groups based on their chemistry: steroids, peptides, and amines. So when it comes to steroids and such, these are able to pass through the cell membrane because they are of the same chemical class as the phospholipids. They're lipids themselves. They are derived, they are produced from a precursor molecule of cholesterol, and then the body takes that and makes all of the steroids that it needs. An example of the male is testosterone. Estrogen is one of the female. There's several estrogens. That's why it's estradiol and such. They are produced and released by the gonads, it'd be the testes and the ovaries, by the adrenal cortex, and I'll mention more about when it comes to glands, the cortex and the medulla, and then the placenta during a pregnancy also secretes steroid hormones, estrogens and all. So here you can look at what a cholesterol molecule looks like, and I shade in this because this is the skeletal backbone of a steroid, and you can see down here how it just changes a few things. And you get the cortisol. Cortisol is produced by the adrenal cortex once again. It's one that is a steroid, or corticoid, that affects glucose. And then you can have your sex steroids. Progesterone is one. Androstenedione, I can't do that very well, is another one. And then you take that progesterone, wait a minute, and your body will produce other ones that will produce the testosterone and the estrogens. This right here, these are the layers of the adrenal cortex, and it's in the cortex has three layers: the zona fasciculata reticularis and capsularis, something like that. I have to look it up again. I never try to keep that in my head too much, but this is an example of aldosterone, which affects sodium and potassium and water, mineral. Corticosteroid, which is cortisol, cortisol. That is a one that goes after glucose. And then, of course, progesterone is a sex steroid. It has effects on your secondary sexual characteristics and all. But you take that androstenedione, I can't do it, so not going to try. And that from that, the body can produce either testosterone or estrogen. And if you look at those two, there ain't much difference in them right there. So you'll see some differences right down here, But those are responsible for your secondary sexual characteristics when puberty hits and everything else after that. So the other groups are peptides and amines. These are water soluble, so they don't cross the membrane. These will attach to a receptor outside of the membrane, and then they'll create internal reactions. They'll cause internal reactions to key off and go. So when you think about peptides, there's short chains, multiple amino acids, but short chains and such. These are secreted by the pituitary, the parathyroid, which is on the back of the thyroid, the heart. Your heart produces ANP, atrial natriuretic peptide. Stomach produces gastrin and some other ones and such. Liver produces one. Kidneys produce certain hormones. And as we go through this semester, you're going to see that. The amines are derived from tyrosine. So if you don't have that in your diet, if you're deficient of that, if you can't produce it, you got a problem right there. But most of us have it. And it's secreted from the thyroid and the adrenal medulla. So when you see adrenal, that's the gland, and the medulla is talking about the middle. Since it is a solid gland, medulla means middle and all. And then based on their size, that affects their solubility. Solubility is the ability to dissolve in water. So how they're produced, where they're stored, and how they're secreted. Steroid, like we mentioned, is derived from cholesterol through a series of biochemical reactions. Any little problem in that pathway, and you can have hormonal imbalances, and then you can have all kinds of problems without the appropriate level of your steroid hormones and such. Once they are produced, though, you don't really store them. They're produced, and they travel in the bloodstream, and they go to the target cell, and they'll pass through, and we'll go over how they work in a minute. But steroids are not stored. That's a little thing you tell yourself. The peptides and such, the peptides, you don't make all of them. You make kind of like a precursor molecule. And then when certain ones are needed, the body will produce key enzymes and produce all of the different ones from those precursor molecules. So you make a lot of the precursor and you store that in little bitty vesicles. They're made, they travel through the ER, they go to the Golgi, they get packaged, they get processed, they get stored and such. And then you kind of like add the enzyme to it, it turns them into what you need, and then boom, they're dumped into the bloodstream. So that way you make the precursor, and then you can make a multitude of different peptides from that one. So, and when you get to the amines, epinephrine, which is adrenaline, these are stored. So you produce the epinephrine and it's stored. And so when you need it, it is there pretty quick. Skip that. Let's see. Maybe not. Yeah. There's more than 50 different hormones. You don't have to know them all. So when we look at the embryological development and when we think about where did they come from, when you know what type of hormone is produced, steroid, peptide, or amine, it points back to the embryological origin. And the embryo, as it's developing, has three basic germ layers, endo, ecto, and mesoderm. And so we can look at the adult, we can figure out, epinephrine, where did it come from type deal. Is it endoderm, is it mesoderm, is it ectoderm? And when you do that, it's fascinating because you look at the adrenal gland. So that's the gland. But it has a cortex, which is from one source, one embryological tissue, and a medulla, which is from another. That's pretty amazing right there. So how it regulates itself is through a negative feedback system. And these negative feedback systems and such, they work on the secretion of almost every hormone, and it occurs in cycles and such. And these cycles and such help to maintain homeostatic control. And these cycles can be, you can read right there, from hours in a day to months in a year. We're just now coming out of the winter, going into the spring, and it sets in it. The sunlight and everything helps set our circadian rhythms. That's a type of a cycle. And then you get certain hormones, neurotransmitter type hormones produced, which create certain feelings, and that's part of these cycles. So here's kind of the example that we use. See if I can squeeze that down. There we go. So this is not you walking outside and it's cold in the morning time. This is you are exposed for a period of time, and your core body temperature drops from 98.6 to like 97. It drops. That your body measures that, and it sends a signal into your hypothalamus. Remember, that's a part of your brain right there. And then that hypothalamus through the infundibulum. So the hypothalamus releases this TRH, thyrotropin releasing hormone. This hormone goes to the anterior pituitary, and it triggers the anterior pituitary to release TSH, which is thyrotropin, which is also called thyroid stimulating hormone. That goes to the thyroid, and it triggers the thyroid to release the thyroxine, which is your thyroid hormone. And it goes to almost every cell in the body, and it turns up the metabolism. So with more mitochondria producing more ATP, you get more heat. More heat brings the body's temperature back up. As the body's temperature comes back up, then you're warmer, the hypothalamus shuts down, and then the anterior pituitary doesn't release as much TSH. Negative feedback. I found this one and I stuck it in there, and I haven't looked at it too much. It's pretty fascinating. I haven't sat down. I just found it recently and all. But this is for your RAS system, and RAS is your renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system, and it has to do with blood volume and blood pressure, and it's how the kidneys are measuring your blood pressure. And your blood pressure is directly related to your blood volume. And when your blood pressure drops, the kidneys release a hormone renin, which then goes to the liver, which then turns angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2. And then the angiotensin 2, which is in the lungs, is released. And that goes and it causes your blood vessels to constrict and all. So, but you can see how as your blood pressure goes up, now that causes a problem in the heart, and in the right atrium of the heart, it'll release this atrionatriuretic peptide because it has a certain pressure that it has a run underneath. And when that increases, we got too much blood. So it releases its AMP, and then that goes, both of these go into the adrenal cortex, the zona glomerulosa. Remember that one right there I just told you about? And that causes either the increased release of aldosterone or the decreased release of aldosterone. Aldosterone then affects the kidneys, and it'll cause the kidneys to either absorb or hold on to sodium. When you hold on to sodium, you hold on to water, or it'll cause a release of potassium. And when you release potassium, the water follows the potassium and your blood volume goes. It works on those two ions, so it's a mineral corticoid in that aspect. So that's really a pretty good thing. I just haven't looked at it that much. So there you go. We mentioned that right there for you. So you gave you a couple of examples and all. So let's see how much more we can go. So you have your secreting cell, releases the hormone. It finds the target cell with the correct receptor. The receptors are proteins, and the proteins, of course, are directed by the DNA. The hormone goes into the bloodstream, travels around, finds that, fits into that receptor. If it's a non-steroidal hormone, that will then trigger a secondary messenger right there. The secondary messenger then works inside the cell, and they have identified some of these and such, and one of them is called cyclic AMP. And so go and look up ATP and then take off 2 phosphates and you have AMP, and it's a linear, but it folds on itself and it forms a cyclical molecule. So, and then that is an intermediate which triggers and causes other other reactions. We're going to stop it right there.